Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a drawing of Sam here on the left hand side. I usually work from my iPad, but today, just for you guys watching from the camera screen, I just did a print out. My printer is running out of ink, which is why he looks a bit like the Incredible Hulk. But as this is a picture that has quite strong contrast, then it's kind of why I chose this picture, but I don't think it really matters. So I've put the pictures side by side just to make things easy. So I'm going to be using kind of a sight size method, so just mapping across and drawing to the same scale. The methodology I'm talking about today is kind of a linear blocking, where we're just representing everything we see on the left hand side is kind of almost a flat 2D shape. So this methodology, because I'm using comparative measurements, also works if you are scaling up or scaling down. So it's quite useful methodology. Obviously there's so many different ways out there, so many options that you have of different ways to draw the human face or other things. I quite like this linear method, but equally Loomis method, there's 100 other ones there that work just as well, sometimes better depending on the situation. I think it's really good to try lots of different ways and kind of figure out for yourself which ones you like and which ones work and when. But I find myself going to this linear blocking more and more these days. I am recording this sound afterwards. I did sort of record some sound at the time, but I was a bit distracted. I'm not very good at multitasking, so I think this way of things is doing better. I'm just using a really cheap retractable pencil. This is a Bic one. It's HB 0.7. The paper I'm using is, again, a very cheap cartridge drawing paper. I have got a putty eraser, but the eraser you have on the end of the pencil will also work fine. I do quite like the putty eraser, so because you can kind of mould them to whatever shape you want, which I think is quite useful. So I'm really looking at the drawing on the left hand side and trying to represent it as lots of straight lines. It's very difficult to draw curves accurately, which is why this method is so powerful. If you can break a curved line into a number of straight lines, then actually as that evolves you draw enough straight lines and eventually they become curved, so which is why this methodology works quite well. The lines I am drawing are quite loose, so I'm not really committing. I'm drawing the lines quite lightly, which is why they might be a little bit challenging to see, but hopefully as the drawing goes along you'll see them a bit better. You can see there's lots of lines going in there, so I'm not really committing yet to exactly which line I'm going to use. That's going to be a decision to make further along the line. So comparative measurement is really about comparing distances to each other. So an ideal example might be I measure the width of the face and then I turn my pencil through 90 degrees and see how that compares to the distances top to bottom. So if I measure the width of the face and turn my pencil 90 degrees, maybe I find out that that's the same distance as the height of the face from the hairline to the chin. And then if I keep doing that and keep comparing measurements one to the other and matching those, then it doesn't matter if I'm drawing something exactly to scale or exactly the same size or I'm doing it to scale, I'm going to always end up with something fairly accurate, as long as what I'm drawing doesn't move. So obviously sometimes when you're drawing from life this can still be a bit challenging, but generally this methodology actually works pretty well, and you usually get a fairly accurate drawing if you really follow the process and not get too distracted as I'm doing right now. Trying to kind of map everything into straight lines. I find that if I can pin down where things are on the vertical axis, so the eyes, the bottom of the nose, the mouth, and then I focus a little bit further along and actually getting them kind of mapped into the horizontal axis as well, and then those elements really get kind of nailed down in terms of where they are. So here I'm just using measurements to really try and get that as accurate as possible. You can see here I'm being naughty, so I've started actually mapping in more shapes than just those horizontal lines, and it's going to come and bite me back in a second because I've got it in the wrong place. But sometimes it's it's better just put something down, even if it's wrong. At least you're making a start and you can correct, rather than just kind of putting off the moment of committing and making a decision. Because again, the good thing about doing these lines lightly with your pencil is you can always fix them later on. So here I am checking my distances. So I can see, oh, I've made his hair not quite tall enough, so the distance from his chin to his forehead is the same as the distance from the top of his hairline to his mouth, so I'm just fixing that now. So pretty happy I've got those distances from the on the vertical axis correct. So the next thing is to check the vertical distances on the horizontal axis. I don't know what I'm talking about. So just making sure that I've kind of mapped the edges of his faces incorrectly. So here I am measuring left to right with my pencil and just comparing it. The one thing I noticed when I did this is actually that distance there I've almost got as the start of the back of his neck, but it's actually to the back of his ear. So I've made his neck and his face too wide, so that's something I need to fix right now. But it's easier to fix now than it would be to fix if I'd already started developing the drawing. So that's why it's so important to take your time, make sure you measure everything, because really it's so easy to fix now, but as soon as I've drawn like the most perfect nose, if I've drawn that in the wrong place on traditional drawing, there is no way to fix that. Or move that, you just have to rub it out and draw again, which is very frustrating. So here I am moving everything along to the left. So another thing that's quite useful is using a plumb line. So back in the day when all those old school artists were drawing, they would use a bit of string with a heavy weight attached to the bottom. And that would give them a perfect vertical line that they could then measure against. And they can also use it to compare distances. So maybe they get their perfect vertical line and they hold it up against the model and notice that the inside of the left eye is exactly above the nostril, for example, or exactly above the bow of the lip. And then they just match that on their drawing. So that's another useful way of doing it as well. Obviously now we've got photographs to work from, so we have lots of things that we can do and lots of angles and lines that we can follow and measure. So don't be just restricted to a straight up and down line. You can follow lots of things. You can look across, you can follow maybe the line on the back of his neck and see where that lines up with and other elements. You can follow the line of his eyebrows and see if that maps across to the top of his ear, and so on and so forth. So following the lines of the face just make sure everything's kind of consistent and looks good. So again, I'm still taking measurements. I'm not just trusting my eyes to see left to right. And I'm really making sure I have that kind of middle of the nose in the right place, because I think we have like this tendency to kind of, people that are slightly turned off their centre, we kind of want to straighten them up and move them back to centre. So I think having that measurement between the middle of the eyes and the middle of the mouth, I think that's quite useful. I think the Loomis method is quite good at this, when you draw that kind of ball and then you do that line down, which kind of reflects like the centre line of the face. That's why that method works so well, is it really makes sure everything's like correctly aligned across the centre line of the face, and you don't end up with that weird kind of turning effect. I don't know why, but I don't really get on with the Loomis method so well. I can see why it works, and I've seen drawings where it works really well, and a lot of artists that do it really well. But for me, I don't know why, it just doesn't really click with me sometimes. The exception is when I'm drawing from life. I'm drawing someone from life who's moving quite a lot, then I find that's actually quite a good method for me. But yeah, generally I prefer this linear blocking approach. I've been doing the Steve Bauman block-in sessions, which I would really recommend. He's got them on his Patreon. If you are really interested in diving into block-ins and kind of figuring out how to do those, then I would recommend his Patreon course there, which is quite useful. So you can see I'm still doing a lot of straight lines here. You can really do like 90% of your drawing just with straight lines. So yeah, they're pretty fantastic. And I'm just really kind of getting closer and closer in on what Sam's face looks like. It's an evolution. And as you develop more detail, then you'll notice more and more the things that aren't working, and you can then fix those. I really like this 3/4 pose with the light, the shadow falling down the cheekbone. I think it's a really good angle, which is why I think maybe I gravitated to this drawing. But it's a really good one to draw with this blocking method, because you can get a really good feel for the person and the shape of their face and the bone structure. So you can still see it, he looks very generic, so it doesn't look like Sam at all. On the right hand side it just looks like a face of maybe a man, who is maybe quite young, and but it doesn't really look like Sam yet, so it doesn't not look like him. So I think the detail, as you add in more detail and more refinement, then it does become closer and closer to look like what the picture on the left does. What you'll see is, as soon as I fill in, the reason I call it a block in is, it looks quite blocky, but it's a posterization, and as soon as you fill in the darks, so I've just done the outline of the block in at the moment, as soon as I fill in the dark colour, you'll see automatically it almost kind of pops into place. So that's something I'll do a little bit later. I'm kind of just, you can kind of pick the order, so you can kind of colour in the darks now and then refine from there, or you can carry on refining the outside shape of the dark areas before you start colouring it in. It's really, there's lots of different ways to skin the cat. You just kind of need to figure out which way works for you. You can see I'm holding the pencil fairly far back. I'm drawing using the edge of it, so I'm not holding it right at the end. I'm not drawing any sharp lines. I'm really just kind of running that pencil along the paper, and I do exactly the same thing when I'm drawing with an iPad. Majority of my drawing is I'm almost holding the pencil like this. I'm standing really far back, so I'm almost drawing with my hand here, my arms held almost straight out, and I'm drawing standing way back so I can see what I'm looking at. Avoid doing you can see that the lip has quite subtle curves, so avoid doing that yet. Try and keep the mouth quite straight until later on in the process, because otherwise they can look quite cartoony. Also avoid outlining the lips. I know I've outlined them a bit here because he has very sharp shadow edges around his mouth, but you'll see as I develop it I try and lose those lines around his mouth as much as possible, because otherwise it looks like he's wearing makeup. So now I've got to the stage where I'm pretty happy with the drawing. I'm just kind of knocking it back a little bit. I do this a little bit when I do my digital drawing, so I kind of get the drawing and smudge it all out. And that allows me to almost I can sort of see where everything is, but then I can then do almost stage 2 and develop it a little bit further. I can, of all those lines, I can pick which one's the one I like. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to check my progress. So I have got an app that I sometimes use for this, which is called the Overlay app. I'm not sponsored. It's a free app. You don't have to pay for it. You can use it for free. This just allows you to overlay your work. So what you do is, sorry, my screen picture is a bit grim. You take a photograph of your work, which I'm doing now. Ding. Once you've got that photograph, you can just try and hold it there so you can see. So use that photo, and then you click on the button on the bottom left, and you choose the photo that you're overlaying, which is your reference photo, and then you can just arrange it to match it up. I find if I'm in a hurry, this is a really good way of figuring out my accuracy. I would say avoid doing this early on, do it later on in the process, so try and get as accurate as possible before you overlay the photograph. And obviously that more accurate your picture is, that your drawing is, the easier this is going to be. If your drawing is way off, then this is going to be really hard and potentially not very helpful. So, I mean, feel free to use it earlier on in the process if you're still kind of getting used to things, and maybe you've just done your initial envelope and want to check the sizes and scales. So I've got it kind of pretty much okay there, so I'm going to click yes, that's fine, and then you can just use the slider along the bottoms to just fade that overlay picture off and on and just see what you've got wrong. So you can see actually a lot of things are in the right places. Yay to me for measuring correctly. There's still a few issues, so I've got his face a little bit wide. There's some kind of weird bulges that I maybe need to get rid of there on the right hand side. I've also, there's a few lines around his ear, I've maybe got it not quite right, and then a bit around his eyes not quite right, and maybe his hair is a little bit short. Really the only thing I got incredibly wrong is his shoulder, which I just put in completely the wrong place. No idea how I managed that. But everything else is pretty much close enough, and I think just with giving my eyes a break and coming back to things, I probably would have picked up on those things, or just having that second measurement. I would have picked up on what's wrong quite quickly. But yeah, all in all, pretty close. I mean, obviously, this has not been a quick process to get to be able to do this quickly and this accurately. It's, it's taken me years and years of practice to get as good at this. But I think actually having that overlay app is like almost like having a teacher on your shoulder to help you realise what you need to fix and what you've done wrong. So quickly going to fix some of the things that I spotted that weren't quite right. Before I forget what they were. You can keep coming back to the overlay app, so you can just keep doing it every 25 minutes, or you can use it not at all and maybe instead just walk to the opposite side of the room, use a mirror to kind of look at your picture backwards, take a little coffee break, come back later. There's lots of different methods you can use to kind of almost reset your eyes and try and figure out what's wrong. But yeah, I do quite like that app as a way of kind of does a bit more hand holding than maybe some of those traditional methods. And I'm sure old school artists would have been using it if they had mobile phones and the overlay app back then. So I think once you've got to this stage, you can kind of decide where you want to take this drawing. Do you want to make it a contour drawing and just kind of maybe just draw the outlines in pencil? Do you want to kind of build something a bit more 3D and really develop something almost like hyper-realistic? Do you want to paint it? I think the blocking that we have at the moment is just a really good foundation for giving you the blueprint for wherever you want to take this drawing from then onwards. So my personal preference is to do just a bit more of a developed lock-in. So that's all I'm going to do today. I don't have a huge amount of time. I don't want to record a really, really long video. Maybe I'll develop this after the call and just kind of add it onto the end of the video. Let's see. I'm not sure. Let's just see how things go. So really, what I would work on now is just developing the edges a little bit more. Then I will shade in the darks to kind of develop that no tan. Well, no tan is just like almost like a posterized black and white drawing. And then just develop the edges a little bit, and then I usually stop from there. If you've watched any of my digital videos, I think the process should be fairly familiar to you. I look at the shadow shapes and the edges of the shadow shapes. Where does it have a hard edge? Where does it have a soft edge? And those are all the things I'm thinking about and trying to replicate when I am working on these shadow shapes. Even with like big areas of dark, big areas of light, you can just kind of spend a lot of time developing the edges, and suddenly you get something that looks very 3D. So that's what you're going to see now. So yeah, I've sped this up a little bit. So I'm just slowly working my way all the way around the edges, really looking hard at the drawing on the left, and just trying to refine the shapes that I'm seeing, making sure everything's correct. So I've got a really good outline between the areas of dark and the areas of light. so that I can, ready for when I go and fill it in. And you can see even before I've got colour on, just the way I'm handling the edges is giving an idea of the form. So we've got very soft edges on the cheek on the left hand side, where the cheek turns quite gently, so near his mouth, but then there's very, very sharp edges, for example on the cast shadow under his nose and the cast shadow under his top lip. So once I've gone all the way around the edges and I'm happy, then it's just a case of filling in those areas of shade. So I'm using my pencil, I'm holding it really far back, and I'm just trying to apply gentle washes of colour, of graphite, with just up and down strokes. Just going up and down, not pressing too hard because I don't want those lines in there so much. I mean, obviously you can see some lines. I'm doing this very quickly. I mean, if I had a lot of time, then I would really be very gentle with the way I'm applying the pencil and just really build up very slowly. But yeah, I'm just trying to speed things along. So I've got my first wash of colour down. It's quite light. I think the camera's adjusting for the colour a little bit, so it's a little bit darker in person, but still quite light. So it gives me a lot of room to build up darker areas like I'm doing now under his mouth. Just kind of slowly build up some more shadow. You don't have to do everything evenly, so let's say my area of interest and focus is the nose and mouth, so maybe that's where I'll have my highest areas of contrast, so my darkest darks against my lightest lights, but then some other areas which are still very dark in the picture, so example, the shoulder on the left hand side, the very dark area, maybe right under his chin. I'm actually really understating that because I don't want that to distract. I want the focus to be very much on his face and his features, not his sideburns or his jacket shoulder. So this is quite helpful, also smudging in. I'm using my finger here just to kind of prove a point, that you don't need expensive tools, but what also works really well is a smudge stick, so stump also called. So it's just a pencil, looks like a pencil, but it's made out of paper, and you can use it to kind of smudge the shadow in. What also works quite well is a sheet of tissue paper, for example, a bit of toilet paper, and you can just use that just to kind of rub the pencil together and kind of make that area of shadow even flatter. So coming back in with the edges. So this process really just ends up repeating itself. So I work for a bit on edges, and then when I'm done with that, I go in and work a bit on building up areas of tone. The eye's not right, is it? And then I go back to edges, and then I kind of pivot between the two. So that's kind of the process I just kind of carry on repeating now. So this is really the refining stage. You can keep going on this until you end up with something almost photorealistic, or you can decide when to stop. It's really what you want to get out of the exercise. This is just for me a practice. It's not going on the wall or anything. It's probably going to be shoved in the back of a cupboard somewhere. So I'm just taking it as far as I want to really today. It's also a bit about experimenting, so this is a practice, so try a few different new things, see if they work. We don't figure out how, everyone's obsessed with their style, right? So you don't really figure out your style until you try a lot of things and figure out what works for you and what you like. So yeah, try a few different things. There are a few areas of slightly darker shade, so you've got to remember the light's coming in from the top right hand side. So although the cheek on the left hand side looks fairly light in comparison to the darkness around his chin and in his eye socket, when you compare that cheek to the right hand side, you can see it's darker. So I do want to get an idea of, this being a 3D, almost like an egg, his head. So I think bringing in some tone around the cheek on the left hand side and around his chin and his muzzle, I think that does help. So yeah, so don't forget to add a bit of shade where it makes sense. So what I really like in drawings is that really exaggerating the core shadow, and by the core shadow I mean it's that almost darkest part of the shadow, and the darkest part of the shadow isn't the furthest away from the light. It's kind of the rim, I'm not explaining this very well, the rim where you don't get any light bouncing back as well. So there's almost like this line that's just inside the edge of the shadow, which is usually the core shadow. So you can see it on his chin, around the edge of his chin where I've done the stubble. So really looking out for that and exaggerating that, I think just has a really cool effect. I think I've just picked it up from a few artists that I follow and seen, and the sort of observing myself, observing the picture. So what is it about this picture that really intrigues me, and can I replicate that? And it's when artists exaggerate that core shadow, I just think it looks really cool, so I've started doing it as well. So yeah, actually the favourite part of this drawing for me was that shadow that I drew around his chin. So yeah, you know what I like. Sometimes it's not always easy to pin down though, so you might have to kind of experiment a little bit to figure it out. So you can see I'm really jumping around quite a lot, so I'm trying not to, I mean obviously I'm kind of working my way around the outline a little bit, but I'm trying not to spend too much focus in one area. I think our eyes get a bit kind of maxed out if we spend too much time focusing on one area, so it's really about jumping around the drawing. If you see something, go and fix it, and when you're doing that, it kind of resets your eyes, so go look somewhere else and see if there's somewhere else so you can fix something as well, and just keep repeating that process. So this drawing is pretty close to where I usually like to take them. Again, I could keep working on this. I don't think the lightness is great. I think I've got the mouth wrong. I made his bottom lip a little bit and his top lip a little bit full, and that's completely changed the appearance of the drawing. Perhaps I also haven't captured the sharpness of his nose very well, and the sharpness of his nose is I've just got the edges wrong around his nose, so I haven't really given the impression of his nose turning sharply enough. And the lips is obviously, maybe I should have measured it a little bit better. It's not something I can't go in and fix if I really want to. If, for example, this was a commission or something I wanted to kind of, or a face I was very familiar with, then I might be wanting to fix it, but yeah, not too bothered, to be honest. I think it's just an exercise in other things rather than lightness for me. That left eye was bothering me a little bit. I couldn't really decide how much to include, so obviously you can see here that there's not a lot you can see on the eye on the left-hand side, with his right eye, but on the left as we look at him. There's a little bit of a highlight in the eye, but I decided not to capture that. You can see a little bit of his eyelid, the edge of his eye, but it is very hard to perceive. So my general rule of thumb is if you have to kind of really work to see something in a reference picture, then you shouldn't really be drawing it. I think when I first started drawing, I was very much, I'm just going to draw around the outlines and have almost like a contour drawing of a face, almost like you would see in a comic book. As I draw more and more, it's more about, can I capture something that looks almost like a 3D person? So I become more sculptural with the way I draw now, and I think maybe that's because I do more painting, I'm not sure. But I like this process. It's definitely more iterative, and you can kind of work and find a likeness, rather than, I think, contour drawing, pencil drawing just around the edges, almost like cartoon drawing, is almost, especially when you're drawing people, it's very unforgiving. you have to kind of commit a bit more, I think, maybe. But yeah, still building in areas of tone. So this drawing is very close to finished. The video, I kind of stopped the recording in a bit because I decided this is quite boring to watch. It's just me repeating this process over and over again. I'm about 45 minutes into the drawing now. I carried on for another 15 minutes, so this ended up being an hour drawing. I'll add a picture on the end so you can see how it ended up. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Obviously the likeness isn't spot on, but the process is fun. It's fun to go through. Give it a go if you've not tried these kind of blocking drawings before. I would recommend Steve Bauman artwork for his blocking bootcamp course, so I will link that below, as well as maybe a couple of artists that are kind of really into this kind of style of drawing that I think I try and emulate, I guess. So yeah, go have a look, see if it floats your boat. So onto wet edges, yeah, obviously on the drawing on the left hand side I can see that like you almost lose that line around the edge of his face on the highlight of his cheek. So yeah, just capture that, and I think it gives the picture a bit of extra oomph. Clearly the lip is bothering me. I'm sort of trying hard to fix it, but yeah. Very like high contrast shape there. I was just trying to capture. So this is the finished picture. I went in and using an eraser to add in some like strokes of hair and smudged the shadow a little bit. It's a little bit messy. I think if I had more time, I'd spend more time building up the tone a little bit more evenly, but as a quick 1 hour sketch, I'm pretty happy with it. So I hope you found this demo useful. Let me know what you thought in the comment section, and I hope you all have a good day. Thanks very much.